Hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk H.P. Lovecraft. If you've not yet subscribed to our channel, please take a moment to do that now, so it'll be easier for you to follow along as I continue to read through the collection, The Crawling Chaos, and others. Alright, so here on Let's Talk H.P. Lovecraft, what I've been doing is working through these collections of H.P. Lovecraft short stories. These stories, unlike the first batch that I did, these are collaborations, these are revisions, these are ghost-written stories. These are basically lesser known H.P. Lovecraft stories where he did not do all of the writing on his own, as opposed to a couple of years ago when I reviewed the complete fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, which are all his solo efforts. I did skip in this collection Under the Pyramids, which came next chronologically, because that was in fact in the other collection as well. That was a tale that was intended to be ghost-written or collaboration with Harry Houdini. However, it's said that Lovecraft did all the writing himself, and it does in fact appear with some of his collections as if it were his own. But for today, we're doing Two Black Bottles, which was written by H.P. Lovecraft and Wilfred Blanch Talman. It was published for the first time in August 1927 in Weird Tales, where pretty much all of Lovecraft's stories were first published. The way these reviews work is that I give a brief synopsis of what happens in the story, and then I try to just put it all into perspective by sharing a few thoughts and things on what the whole thing means. Where does it fit into the Lovecraft canon? Is it worth your time to read? As for that synopsis, being the last living relative, the nephew of a rural New York preacher, Dominie Johannes Vanderhoof, is called to a small town to possibly collect any inheritance that was left behind. The narrator also has this weird feeling that somehow, despite what he's been told, his uncle's in fact not dead, which, this being a creepy story, that's sure to come in later. But he received a letter about his uncle's passing from the town grocer, Mark Haynes. So upon his arrival in town, that's the first person he visits. Mr. Haynes tells him a story how 10 years earlier, Abel Foster, the town sexton, arrived at the church and began working with his uncle. And it was at that point when things started to go bad around town. The town mine failed. Vanderhoof became increasingly angry and dark, and he began preaching a lot of stuff that was very clearly not from the Christian Bible, and there were rumors of black magic, and it was said that he had in fact sold his soul to the devil. As Foster himself, the sexton, meanwhile, seemed to creep everyone out by the way he sort of lurked around and stared, and sort of his lurking around the cemetery where he was in fact charged with digging some of the graves, and it was very clear that something unwholesome was going on. And so one by one the congregation began to break up. People stopped attending church, and for all intents and purposes, Vanderhoof would have lost his job were it not for the fact that no one had the bravery to go and tell him to move the hell out of the property. It all eventually culminated 2 weeks earlier with Vanderhoof, in fact, dying, and Foster being seen throwing him into a hole in the cemetery and erecting a shiny new cross over his head. Leaving Haynes' grocery store, the narrator sets out just before dark against Haynes' best recommendations, and in fact goes to the church. On his way into passing through the cemetery, he notices a fresh grave, and there's a beautiful new cross erected, standing vertically over where the headstone should be. He sees lights in the belfry tower and hears singing. He calls out. Nobody responds, so he eventually feels resigned to enter himself. So he removes the hinges from the door and enters. Inside, he finds Abel Foster, who is drunk out of his mind, looking emaciated, looking quite scared and terrified. He's surrounded by strange books and bottles and jars of weird substances, and he confesses then almost immediately to having stolen the soul of Vanderhoof and having put it into a small bottle just over there on the shelf. And oddly, the narrator feels compelled to believe it's a little bit too soon for my taste, but he believes it, and he finds out that, excuse me, it sounds like they're sucking up leaves outside. Sorry about that. Foster believes that having buried the uncle soulless but alive in the grave, that he's in fact trying to dig his way out and to come and to kill him. The narrator looks out the window, finds that the cross has now fallen over, and he basically says, wouldn't it be best to give him his soul back? And that would save our lives, wouldn't it? Surely that would do it. So he picks up these 2 black bottles, not knowing which one is which. Foster reveals that 200 years earlier, the previous preacher had in fact stolen his soul, and then in the intervening years when he was supposed to be working, he would read the books and eventually learn the same witchcraft that the original preacher had brought in over from Europe, and had slowly and sadistically enacted on the town hundreds and hundreds of years earlier. Tussling with the narrator, Foster causes one of the jars to fall and to break, and it was in fact the jar containing his soul, which had been extracted 200 years earlier. And so suddenly, like something out of Indiana Jones, Foster becomes emaciated and basically quickly ages all in a few seconds, and poof, he's nothing but a pile of dust. The other bottle, the bottle presumably containing the soul of Vanderhoof, begins to grow warm and hot and give off light in the hand of the narrator, who, scared out of his wits, puts it down on the table and makes a run for it. As he's running out of the church through the cemetery, he notices a shadow emerging from the grave of his uncle. The next day, back in town at the grocery store, he tells the story to a bunch of men. He doesn't really get much of a reaction from any of them. At least they're afraid to say anything. One of them does believe him enough to agree to walk out to the church to find out the truth of the matter. When they get into the church, they find the other bottle gone. And from that time on, there are rumors of a shadow lurking the night in the area. It's a fun little story. I'm reminded of, I would say, what is perhaps a simplified version of a much better Lovecraft tale. One of my favorite Lovecraft tales, The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. There's also definite shades of Washington Irving. It does have a Sleepy Hollow feel to the whole thing. A little bit of Sleepy Hollow, a little bit of what's the other one? I forget the other tale that Irving is so famous for. But at the same time, it's not fully effective. There's good setup, good atmosphere, very much trademark Lovecraft. But when you get to the end, there's not a lot of effective payoff. Foster confesses to his deeds way too soon, as the narrator, meanwhile, is way too quick to accept these explanations and to come to believe this thing. This is all done with what I would say is not enough genuine scares to have put the fear of God into the narrator and to have caused him to have come to this conclusion. Usually what happens in Lovecraft is this overwhelming sense of terror causes people to lose their wits. And that didn't really happen here. It feels like the narrator is way too sane throughout the entire process. And I think that's a little bit of a letdown as far as Lovecraft's canon is concerned. I would say that on the whole, it's second, possibly third tier for a Lovecraft story. I think a lot of authors would very much be happy to have written this story, and in the hands of other authors, you would say, yeah, this is a pretty good tale for that author. But for Lovecraft, with his reputation as being the master of cosmic horror, this is a little bit weak. That said, I am still, I would say, a little bit satisfied with it, that my 30 minutes of time was not completely wasted. And Yeah, I like it. I would read it again, but it's not going to stick with me in the way that the case of Charles Dexter Ward did a couple of years ago. So, all right. Thank you for listening. If you have something positive or constructive to say about this story, your thoughts and feelings on it, feel free to drop in the comment section below, and I'll try to get to them in the coming days. In the meantime, I hope you'll subscribe and return in a couple of days when we will discuss the last test, also from this collection, which we are quickly burning our way through one story at a time. Thank you, and until next time, keep it creepy.